The 1876 election was perhaps the most contested election in the nation's first 230 years. Despite this distinction, or maybe because of it, the election and the presidency of Rutherford B. Hayes are nearly erased from our historical memory. The only exception is the uses made of the crisis to construct narratives of a secret deal to sell out the Southern blacks in return for Hayes's presidential power. However, simply scratching the surface of this narrative reveals its falsity. So today we will take a look at that narrative, Rutherford B. Hayes's life, the campaign of 1876, and the crisis that led to a commission to determine the winner. In our own time, it may be more important for what it can tell us about finding ways, in the midst of an election crisis, to create a peaceful outcome. In the telling of historians such as Eric Foner, the election resulted in the Republican Party making a backroom deal with Democrats during the crisis that followed the election. Democrat Samuel Tilden had won 184 electoral votes of the necessary 185 and had won the popular vote, while Hayes only had 165 votes. However, 4 states, South Carolina, Florida, Louisiana, and Oregon, had 20 contested electoral votes that needed to be assigned. Electoral irregularities in each state left the contest in doubt. Both sides could credibly claim the first 3 states, and likely each side had cheated. As a result, Congress created an electoral commission to determine the results. According to Foner, in the closing days of that commission, a secret deal was crafted under which the Democrats would allow the votes to go to Hayes, and in return, he would pull the remaining troops out of the South. This deal would give the Democrats control of all the southern states, selling out Southern blacks in exchange for Republican national political power. A compelling story, it is woven of misstatements, misunderstandings, and cherry-picked facts, and suffers from historicism, looking at history from the results backward, rather than as history unfolds, moving forward into the unknown. Far from being the type of person who would cavalierly sell out the freedmen for political power, Hayes had a long history of aiding their cause. A successful lawyer in Cincinnati, he helped defend runaway slaves and was a staunch abolitionist by the 1840s. Despite being 38 years old and not subject to a draft call, he promptly volunteered when war commenced, rising to Major General, and was wounded 5 times in battle. Fully 1/3 of his regiment failed to return from the war. Hayes, contrary to the image of a power-hungry politician, ran for president urging an amendment to the change to a single 6-year term and pledged to serve only 1 4-year term himself. Reading his diary, one is struck by the amount of time he spent in private contemplation about improving the lot of African Americans. For instance, on the day after the election, when he thought he had lost, Hayes wrote a letter, quote, "I don't care for myself, and the party, yes, and the country too can stand it, but I do care for the poor colored men of the South. The colored man's fate will be worse than when he was in slavery." Fully 1/3 of Hayes's platform dealt with the South. He pledged to organize his government with regard to, quote, "the interests of the white and the colored people both and equally." To the contrary, popular anti-corruption Democrat governor of New York, Samuel Tilden, ran on a platform that had very little to say about the South and nothing directly about blacks. Despite the messy way he rose to the presidency and the resumption of Democrat control in the South, Hayes maintained pressure using the bully pulpit throughout his 4 years to ensure these governments maintained the rights of freedmen. As one historian put it, quote, "Generally, it was not until Hayes was out of office that whites in the South began to use the standard ruses of the poll tax, the literacy test, and the white primary to restrict or eliminate black voting rights in southern states." In later life, Hayes became chair of the John Fox Slater Fund for the Education of Freedmen, overseeing the distribution of $1 million to establish or expand what are now known as historically black colleges and universities. So if the narrative is flawed about the man, how about the facts surrounding that controversial election? Election day in the South was marred by violent voter intimidation by Democrat Party militias and ballot stuffing by Republicans in areas they still controlled. As a result, the states of South Carolina, Florida, and Louisiana sent competing slates of electors to Congress. In Oregon, a technical objection over one elector's right to serve also became an issue. The Constitution restricts any person holding an office of trust or profit under the United States from serving, and the question in Oregon hinged over that definition. Despite winning the popular vote, the Democrats were in a weak position regarding the electoral vote count. They held a slim majority in the House, but the Republicans controlled the presidency, the Supreme Court, and the Senate. According to the Constitution, quote, "The President of the Senate shall, in the presence of Senate and House of Representatives, open all the certificates, and the votes shall then be counted." The Republicans interpreted this to mean that the Senate president could decide among the contested ballots, thus Hayes would win. On the other hand, the Democrats claimed that the House should decide, and backers supported violence to make their case. For instance, one Kentucky congressman called for an army of 100,000 Democrat volunteers to march on Washington. Due to threats of a resumption of civil war, the Republicans accepted Democrat demands that an independent commission be set up to allot the electoral votes. The Electoral Commission Act in late January created a body of 15 made up of 5 each from the House, the Senate, and the Supreme Court. If Tilden got even one of the 20 votes, he would be elected. Hayes needed all 20 to win. Many Republicans were unhappy with this compromise, even more so as the commission took shape. The allotment of commissioners gave each chamber of Congress 5 votes, with the majority going to the majority party of that chamber. The decision of the commission could only be overturned by a vote of both houses of Congress. The House provided 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans, while the Senate reversed this majority. The Supreme Court was to choose 4 members based on geographic diversity, but in fact consisted of 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. Then those 4 would select the 5th from among the remaining justices as an independent member. With a 7-7 split, that seat was the only one that mattered. Initially, the justices selected David Davis, an independent who actually favored the Democrats. At word of this, the Republican newspapers exploded with vitriol as they viewed their properly won election about to be stolen from them. In fact, Democrats in Illinois were so excited to know that their favorite son was on the verge of returning the party to the presidency after 16 long years, that they promptly elected Davis to the Senate, knowing that was something he wanted. The expectation was that he would remain on the commission to ensure Tilden's election, but Davis promptly resigned to prepare for his new job. This left a gap that by law could only be filled from among the remaining justices. Since all remaining were known Republican supporters, the outcome was now preordained. Immediately, political views flipped. Democratic papers attacked the commission they had demanded because their rightfully won election would be stolen from them. Politics, not a nefarious bargain, determined the outcome of the 1876 election. Well before the secret deal that Foner describes occurred, all the disputed votes had been assigned by the commission to Hayes. The only card left for the Democrats to play was the threat of a filibuster in March regarding the final vote. It is on this that some historians seem to hang their narrative of a secret deal. Despite these claims, it was Northern Democrats, not Southern ones, who caved to quash the filibuster threat, not the supposed conspirators. Had they filibustered, a Republican was going to take power regardless. In the event of a House filibuster, no president would be chosen by 4 March. According to the 12th Amendment to the Constitution, if they did not decide by that day, quote, then the vice president shall act as president, and this would be chosen by the Republican-controlled Senate. In the event nobody was chosen, the 1792 Succession Act, then current, provided for the Senate pro tem to be president. The Republicans controlled the Senate, so they would either select the vice president to become president, or the president of the Senate would assume the position. Thus, a Republican was going to take power on 4 March. The only question was who. The threats of renewed civil war, though scary, ultimately led calmer heads among those familiar with the reality of war. It tamped down the tensions, killed the filibuster, and they accepted the result. The Foner thesis hinges on the U.S. Army being in the South to prop up those Reconstruction governments by force. Thus, in his telling, pulling them out was a betrayal. This misstates key facts. By 1876, the entire U.S. Army was authorized a mere 28,000 men, though the actual number was less. What were they doing in 1876? Well, at the time Hayes gave his convention's acceptance speech in July, news of Custer's death at Little Bighorn filled the papers. Most of the Army was engaged either in the Plains Indian Wars, garrisoning coastal forts, or training. As this map shows, even in the aftermath of the Civil War, the Union Army's span of control was very limited. By November of 1876, there were just 1,169 troops in all of Louisiana, 490 in South Carolina, and about 700 in Florida. The Army literally controlled only a few square blocks of New Orleans and Columbia, South Carolina. The total number additional available troops to enforce Reconstruction was at most 1,000 men for an area of over 750,000 square miles. To actually occupy this area could have required an army of 500,000 men. A Democrat-controlled House of Representatives would never authorize such a force. In fact, they quickly passed the Posse Comitatus Act when they gained the Senate to prevent the use of troops within the states. To make matters worse, during the summer of 1877, all available troops were employed reacting to the Great Railroad Strike. For good or ill, President Hayes sought to balance between the federal and state government's responsibilities, as well as the political realities of America in 1877. In his inaugural address, Hayes spoke of a desire to restore the economy of the South, but also, quote, the sweeping revolution of the entire labor system of a large portion of our country and the advance of 4 millions of people from a condition of servitude to that of citizenship on an equal footing with their former masters is the responsibility of the national government. He attempted to do this throughout his term. Contrary to historians who claim Hayes changed his policy for power, this address reflected the views of his acceptance speech at the convention in July. He was elected upon this basis. Hayes was determined, rightly or wrongly, that the harsh policy pursued by President Grant had backfired. Rather than leading to a reconstructed South, it had produced a region on the verge of a new civil war, with Democrat militia forces openly training. Meanwhile, political support for continuing Reconstruction had collapsed in the North, as reflected in Tilden's popular vote total. Other parts of the deal had actually been put forth during the campaign, not as a result of the post-election crisis. For instance, Hayes announced his intention to appoint a Democrat to the cabinet as an olive branch to the South, as well as economically beneficial federal projects, and a milder hand in dealing with the South. He expected to be reciprocated in his desires that the freedmen be treated as citizens. Hayes viewed the only solution forward was to let governments with local support come to power and use federal power instead to help expand economic opportunity to all in the destitute region while keeping the pressure on to maintain the rights of freedmen. Over time, this would, he felt, overcome the animosities, and the rising tide would lift all boats from the mud of poverty. We can look back at this policy and see the mixed results over the succeeding 20 years, eventually resulting in disfranchisement across the South. But I don't think anyone should confuse Hayes's overly optimistic policy for one of disgraceful intent. The struggle for rights in the South continued until Plessy versus Ferguson ruling by court fiat settled the issue for 50 years. By that time, Hayes was long gone from the scene. On the other hand, the crisis of 1877 shows us that even in the midst of bitter partisan feud, in which each side believed itself to be right, calmer heads can prevail when they are willing to put the Union first.